Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary tales and boundless imagination come to life. Enjoy the story and don't forget to subscribe.
The dimly lit auction hall was alive with murmurs and whispers as bidders gathered around holographic displays showcasing rare artifacts and forbidden treasures. Among them stood Kieran Voss, a scruffy human engineer turned smuggler, trying hard not to look out of place amidst the galaxy's wealthiest criminals. He wasn't here for trouble, he was here for tech. Specifically, a rare power core rumored to be capable of jump-starting dying star ships, a priceless find for someone like him who lived on the fringes of legality. But then he saw her. Encased in a shimmering containment field stood an alien woman with violet skin that seemed to glow faintly under the harsh lights. Her silver eyes scanned the crowd with defiance rather than fear, a stark contrast to every other slave on display that night. She didn't cower or plead, she stood tall despite the chains around her wrists. Lot number 47, announced the auctioneer with theatrical flair. A rare specimen from beyond the outer rim. Strong-willed yet unbroken, a perfect addition for any discerning collector. Kieran felt his stomach churn at the words. He wasn't naive about how things worked in this part of space. Slavery was just another business, but something about this woman struck him differently. Her gaze swept over him briefly before moving on. For a moment, he thought he saw something, a silent plea buried beneath layers of defiance. The bidding began. Kieran hadn't planned on getting involved, he didn't even have enough credits for such an extravagant purchase. But before he knew it, his hand was raised. 200,000 credits, he called out firmly. Gasps rippled through the crowd as heads turned toward him. He ignored their stares and focused on her face instead. For a brief moment, those silver eyes locked onto his again, this time lingering just long enough for him to feel certain. Sold, declared the auctioneer moments later. As guards escorted her toward him, Kieran realized two things. First, he had just spent every last credit he had. Second, and more importantly, he had no idea what came next. Leora remained silent as she was led aboard Kieran's ship, the Starfire. Her chains had been removed during transfer but not before leaving red marks on her wrists. She didn't thank him or ask questions, instead, she sat quietly in one corner while eyeing him warily. "You're free now," Kieran said awkwardly after several minutes of silence. She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "Okay," he sighed. "Not much of a talker, I get it." Still nothing. Frustrated but unwilling to push further just yet, Kieran left her alone and headed toward the cockpit where his co-pilot, a grumpy droid named Jax, was waiting impatiently. "Care to explain why we're harboring fugitives now?" Jax asked dryly as soon as Kieran entered. "She's not," Kieran began but stopped short because even he wasn't sure how this would play out yet. "She better not be trouble," Jax muttered before turning back toward navigation controls. Trouble? Oh yeah, trouble was definitely coming, for both of them. Kieran adjusted the Starfire's trajectory, his hands flying over the controls. The ship, a patchwork of scavenged parts and custom modifications, responded sluggishly to his commands. He glanced back at the passenger cabin, where Leora remained an enigma. "How close are they?" he asked Jax, who was monitoring the sensor arrays. "Too close," Jax replied flatly. "Zarkan cruisers, 2 of them, closing in fast. They must have flagged you as soon as you left the station." Kieran cursed under his breath. He had anticipated some heat, but not this much. "Can we outrun them? In this rust bucket?" "Not likely," Jax retorted. "Our best bet is to jump into hyperspace, but the Zarkans are jamming signals. We'll have to do it manually, and the coordinates are scrambled." Kieran swore again. Hyperspace jumps were risky enough under normal circumstances. Without precise coordinates, they could end up inside a star or worse. But staying here meant certain capture, and a grim fate for Leora. "Prepare for a manual jump," he ordered, his voice tight. "Leora, strap yourself in. This could get bumpy." He heard a soft footstep behind him and turned to see Leora standing in the doorway, her silver eyes narrowed. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice calm despite the urgency in the air. "We're being pursued," Kieran explained quickly. "Zarkan enforcers. We have to jump into hyperspace, but it's going to be rough." Leora nodded, unfazed. "I can help," she said, stepping forward. Kieran hesitated. He still knew next to nothing about her, but he was running out of options. "What do you mean?" "I have knowledge of hyperspace routes," she replied, her gaze intense. "Routes they won't expect." He weighed his options for a split second. "All right," he said, gesturing toward the navigation console. "Guide me." Leora moved with surprising confidence, her hands flying over the controls. She input a series of complex calculations, her violet fingers dancing across the holographic display. "Now," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Initiate the jump sequence." Kieran followed her instructions, his heart pounding in his chest. The Starfire shuddered violently as the engine strained to tear a hole in spacetime. Outside, the stars stretched and warped into streaks of blinding light. They were in. The initial jump was successful, but the Zarkan cruisers were still on their tail. Leora explained that the routes she had chosen were convoluted and difficult to navigate. The Starfire twisted and turned through hyperspace, narrowly avoiding collisions with rogue asteroids and energy fields. "We need to lay low," Kieran said, his brow furrowed. "Find a place to repair and recalibrate the engines." Leora suggested a remote asteroid field, far from any major trade routes. She claimed it was once a haven for smugglers and rebels, offering natural cover and hidden docking bays. "It's risky," Jax warned. "The field is unstable, and there are rumors of pirates." "We have no choice," Kieran said, his eyes fixed on the swirling chaos of hyperspace. As they approached the asteroid field, Leora grew increasingly agitated. She paced the cockpit, her eyes darting from one display to another. "Something's wrong," she said, her voice tight. "We're being drawn in, toward the center of the field." Suddenly, the Starfire lurched violently, throwing Kieran and Leora against the console. Alarms blared as the ship lost power. "What happened?" Kieran shouted over the din. "Gravity well," Jax replied grimly. "Some kind of artificial anomaly. We're being pulled in." Kieran struggled to regain control, but it was no use. The Starfire was caught in an invisible current, hurtling toward the heart of the asteroid field. "Brace yourselves," he yelled as the ship plunged into darkness. When Kieran came to, he was lying on the floor of the cockpit, his head throbbing. He groaned and pushed himself up, his vision blurry. "Jax," he called out, his voice hoarse. "Online," the droid replied weakly. "Systems are damaged, but functional. We're alive, barely." Kieran looked around. The Starfire was wedged between two massive asteroids, its hull groaning under the pressure. The cockpit was dimly lit by emergency lights. "Leora," he said, his heart sinking. He found her lying unconscious near the escape hatch. He rushed to her side, checking her pulse. It was faint but steady. As he lifted her into his arms, he noticed something strange. Her skin was glowing with a faint, ethereal light. And then, he saw it, a faint energy field emanating from her body, pushing back against the crushing weight of the asteroids. He stared in disbelief, his mind reeling. What was she? Just then, a klaxon blared throughout the ship. "Intruders," Jax announced. "Boarding party approaching." Kieran knew they were out of time. He had to get Leora to safety, but how? He glanced around the damaged cockpit, desperately searching for a way out. Then, he saw it, a narrow crevice between the asteroids, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. "Jax," he said, his voice urgent. "Can you create a diversion? Something to draw their attention away from us?" Affirmative, the droid replied. But it won't last long. Kieran nodded. That's all I need. He hoisted Leora over his shoulder and squeezed through the crevice, plunging into the darkness of the asteroid field. He didn't know what awaited them, but he knew one thing for sure: their escape had just become a whole lot more complicated. As Kieran navigated the treacherous tunnels of the asteroid field, Leora began to stir. She groaned and opened her eyes, her silver gaze unfocused. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice weak. "Hiding," Kieran replied, his muscles aching. "Zarkin enforcers boarded the ship. We need to keep moving." Leora nodded slowly, her eyes clearing. My abilities," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're returning." Kieran stopped, his brow furrowed. "Abilities? What kind of abilities?" Leora hesitated, her expression troubled. I can manipulate energy," she said finally. "But it's been dormant for years. I don't know how much control I have." Before Kieran could respond, they heard the sound of approaching footsteps. The Zarkin enforcers were closing in. "We have to go," he said, grabbing her hand. They pressed on, deeper into the labyrinthine tunnels. The asteroid field was a disorienting maze of rock and shadow, but Leora seemed to know where she was going. She led him through narrow passages and across precarious ledges, her senses guiding them through the darkness. Suddenly, they reached a dead end. A massive wall of rock blocked their path. "We're trapped," Kieran said, his voice tight. Leora stepped forward, her silver eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. She raised her hands, and a surge of energy crackled around her. "Stand back," she said, her voice strained. "I'll try to create an opening." Kieran watched in awe as Leora focused her energy on the wall of rock. The stone began to glow red-hot, then crumbled and cracked under the intensity of her power. With a final burst of energy, she blasted a hole through the wall, creating a new passage. They scrambled through the opening, leaving a trail of dust and debris behind them. As they emerged into a larger cavern, they found themselves face to face with their pursuers. The Zarkin enforcers, clad in black armor and armed with energy rifles, stared at them in surprise. They raised their weapons, ready to fire. Kieran knew they were outgunned and outmatched. But then, Leora stepped in front of him, her eyes blazing with power. "You will not take us," she said, her voice ringing with authority. And then, she unleashed her power. A wave of energy erupted from her body, slamming into the enforcers with devastating force. They were thrown back against the cavern walls, their armor cracking and shattering under the impact. Kieran watched in stunned silence as Leora single-handedly defeated their pursuers. He had no idea what she was capable of, but he knew one thing for sure: she was far more than just a slave. She was a force to be reckoned with. As the dust settled, Leora turned to him, her expression weary but determined. "We need to keep moving," she said, her voice low. "They will send more." Kieran nodded, his mind still reeling from what he had just witnessed. He knew their escape was far from over, but for the first time since he had bought her at the auction, he felt a glimmer of hope. With Leora by his side, anything was possible. The asteroid field was a graveyard of dreams, a place where hope went to die. Kieran and Leora moved through the labyrinthine tunnels, their steps echoing in the oppressive silence. Leora's earlier display of power had been both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Kieran found himself looking at her with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. "Where are we going?" Kieran asked, his breath clouding in the cold air. "To a safe place," Leora replied, her voice distant. "A place where we can find allies." Kieran didn't press further. He had learned that Leora would reveal information when she was ready, and not a moment sooner. He trusted her instincts, even if he didn't fully understand them. After hours of navigating the treacherous terrain, they reached a hidden entrance, a narrow opening concealed behind a cluster of jagged rocks. Leora pressed a sequence of symbols on a nearby panel, and the rocks shifted, revealing a dark passage. "This way," she said, stepping inside. The passage led them to an underground complex, a network of tunnels and chambers that had been carved out of the asteroid itself. Flickering lights illuminated the space, revealing signs of habitation. "This is it?" Kieran asked, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "This is where the resistance hides," Leora replied, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. As if on cue, a group of armed figures emerged from the shadows, their weapons trained on Kieran and Leora. They were a motley crew, clad in worn armor and wielding an assortment of makeshift weapons. "Who are you?" a gruff voice demanded. Leora stepped forward, her chin held high. "I am Leora," she announced. "And I seek refuge among those who fight against the Zarkan Dominion." The armed figures exchanged wary glances. After a moment of tense silence, one of them stepped forward. "Leora," he said, his eyes widening in recognition. "Is it truly you?" "Drake Solon." Leora replied, her voice filled with surprise. "I thought you were dead." Drake Solon, a grizzled veteran with a cybernetic eye and a hardened expression, was a former ally of Leora's from her days as a rebel leader. He had fought alongside her in the rebellion against the Zarkan Dominion, but he had been presumed dead after a failed mission years ago. "Rumors of my demise have been greatly exaggerated," Drake said with a wry smile. "Come, let us speak in private." Drake led Kieran and Leora to a makeshift command center, a small chamber filled with communication equipment and strategic maps. He offered them food and drink, his eyes never leaving Leora's face. "It's been a long time," Drake said, his voice filled with emotion. "I never thought I would see you again." "I thought you were dead," Leora replied, her expression somber. "What happened?" Drake explained that he had been captured by the Zarkan Dominion after their failed mission. He had been imprisoned for years, subjected to torture and interrogation. But he had managed to escape, joining the resistance movement in the asteroid field. "We've been fighting a losing battle," Drake admitted. "The Zarkan Dominion is too powerful. We lack the resources and the leadership to mount a serious challenge." Leora nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's why I'm here," she said. "I have knowledge of a weapon that could turn the tide against them." Drake's eyes widened. "A weapon? What kind of weapon?" Leora explained that she possessed knowledge of an ancient artifact hidden on her homeworld, an artifact of immense power that could be used to defeat the Zarkan Dominion. "But it's heavily guarded," she warned. "Retrieving it will be extremely dangerous." Drake was silent for a moment, weighing his options. "We have nothing to lose," he said finally. "We will help you retrieve this weapon." Kieran watched the exchange with growing unease. He had initially agreed to help Leora out of a sense of obligation and curiosity, but he was beginning to realize the scope of what he had gotten himself into. He was now involved in a full-blown rebellion against a powerful empire. "What about me?" Kieran asked, his voice tinged with concern. "Where do I fit into all of this?" Leora turned to him, her silver eyes filled with gratitude. "You saved me from slavery," she said. "You gave me a chance to fight for my freedom. I will never forget that. You are with us now, Kieran. Whether you like it or not." As Leora and Drake discussed strategy, Kieran found himself feeling increasingly out of place. He was a smuggler and an engineer, not a soldier or a revolutionary. He had no experience in warfare or politics. He was just a regular guy who had stumbled into something far bigger than himself. He wandered away from the command center, seeking a quiet place to think. He found a secluded chamber and sat down, his head in his hands. "Rough day," a voice said from behind him. Kieran looked up to see a young woman standing in the doorway. She was one of the resistance fighters, her face smudged with dirt and her eyes filled with a mixture of weariness and determination. "You look like you could use a drink," she said, offering him a flask of some kind of potent liquor. Kieran accepted the flask and took a swig. The liquid burned his throat, but it helped to clear his head. "Thanks," he said, handing the flask back. "Don't mention it," the woman replied, taking a swig herself. "Name's Alina, by the way." "Kieran," he said. "So, Kieran," Alina said, leaning against the wall. "What brings a smuggler like you to a place like this?" Kieran hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. I helped Leora escape from slavery," he said finally. "I didn't realize she was planning a rebellion." Alina chuckled. "Leora has a way of inspiring people," she said. "She's a symbol of hope for our people. We've been waiting for her return for a long time." "But it's a suicide mission," Kieran protested. "The Zarkan Dominion is too strong. We don't stand a chance." Alina shrugged. "Maybe," she said. "But we have to try. We can't just sit here and wait to be crushed. We have to fight for our freedom." Her words struck a chord within Kieran. He had always been a survivor, looking out for himself and avoiding trouble. But he was beginning to realize that there was more to life than just survival. There was also the possibility of fighting for something bigger than himself. "I don't know if I'm cut out for this," Kieran admitted. "I'm not a hero." "Nobody's born a hero," Alina replied. "It's something you become. When you decide that there's something worth fighting for." As the days turned into nights, Kieran found himself becoming more and more involved in the resistance effort. He used his engineering skills to repair and upgrade their equipment, and he learned to fight alongside them in training exercises. He even began to feel a sense of camaraderie with the other resistance fighters, a feeling he had never experienced before. But not everyone trusted him. Some of the resistance fighters were suspicious of his motives, believing that he was a spy for the Zarkan Dominion. They whispered behind his back and gave him wary glances. One night, as Kieran was working on a damaged communication device, he overheard a conversation between two resistance fighters. "I don't trust that human," one of them said. "He's hiding something." "Maybe he's working with the Zarkans," the other replied. "Maybe he led Leora right to us." Kieran felt a surge of anger and betrayal. He had risked his life to help Leora, and this was how he was repaid. He confronted the two resistance fighters, his voice trembling with rage. "How dare you accuse me of being a traitor?" he demanded. "I've done nothing but help you." The two resistance fighters sneered at him. "That's what a traitor would say," one of them replied. Before the situation could escalate, Leora intervened. She stepped between Kieran and the two resistance fighters, her eyes blazing with anger. "Enough," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "Kieran is my ally. Anyone who accuses him of being a traitor accuses me as well." Her words silenced the two resistance fighters. They lowered their heads in shame, avoiding her gaze. "I trust Kieran with my life," Leora continued, her voice softening. "He has proven his loyalty time and time again. I will not tolerate anyone questioning his motives." Her defense of Kieran solidified his place within the resistance. The other fighters finally accepted him as one of their own, and he felt a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. But their newfound unity was short-lived. One morning, as they were preparing for their next mission, the alarm sirens blared throughout the complex. "We're under attack," someone shouted. "The Zarkans are here." The Zarkan Dominion had discovered their hideout. Captain Rylus, the relentless bounty hunter, had tracked them to the asteroid field. He had brought with him a squadron of heavily armed soldiers, determined to capture Leora and crush the resistance. The resistance fighters scrambled to their positions, preparing to defend their home. Kieran grabbed his weapon and joined them, his heart pounding in his chest. "Get ready," he said to Alina, who was standing next to him. "This is going to be a fight." As the Zarkan soldiers stormed the complex, the resistance fighters opened fire. Energy blasts ricocheted off the walls, and explosions rocked the tunnels. The battle had begun. Kieran fought alongside the resistance fighters, his adrenaline pumping. He had never killed anyone before, but he knew that he had to defend himself and his new friends. He fought with a ferocity he didn't know he possessed, taking down Zarkan soldiers left and right. He was no longer just a smuggler or an engineer. He was a warrior. But the Zarkan soldiers were too numerous and too well equipped. They slowly pushed the resistance fighters back, gaining ground with each passing minute. As the battle raged on, Kieran found himself face to face with Captain Rylus himself. The bounty hunter was a formidable opponent, his movements swift and deadly. "You're a fool to stand against the Zarkan Dominion," Captain Rylus sneered. "Your rebellion is doomed." Kieran spat on the ground. "We'll see about that," he said. He charged at Captain Rylus, his weapon blazing. But the bounty hunter was too quick. He dodged Kieran's attack and struck him with a powerful blow, sending him crashing to the ground. As Kieran lay dazed on the floor, Captain Rylus raised his weapon, preparing to deliver the final blow. But then, Leora appeared, her silver eyes blazing with power. "You will not harm him," she said, her voice filled with fury. She unleashed a wave of energy, blasting Captain Rylus back against the wall. The bounty hunter staggered to his feet, his armor scorched and smoking. "You cannot defeat me," Captain Rylus said, his voice strained. "The Zarkan Dominion will crush you all." Leora stepped forward, her hands crackling with energy. "We will never surrender," she said. "We will fight for our freedom until the very end." And then, she unleashed the full force of her power. The battle between Leora and Captain Rylus was a clash of titans. Energy blasts filled the complex, tearing through walls and collapsing tunnels. The resistance fighters watched in awe as Leora fought with a ferocity they had never seen before. But even her immense power was not enough to defeat Captain Rylus. The bounty hunter was too skilled, too experienced. He dodged her attacks and countered with his own, slowly wearing her down. As the battle reached its climax, Leora found herself cornered. Captain Rylus raised his weapon, preparing to deliver the killing blow. "It's over, Leora," he said, his voice cold and emotionless. "Your rebellion ends here." But then, something unexpected happened. As Captain Rylus prepared to fire, he hesitated. He looked at Leora, his expression troubled. "I can't do it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't kill you." He lowered his weapon, his body trembling. "I've been hunting you for years," he said. "I thought you were a traitor, a criminal. But I was wrong. You're not the enemy. The Zarkan Dominion is." He turned to the Zarkan soldiers, his voice ringing with newfound conviction. "Stand down," he ordered. "We're leaving." The Zarkan soldiers stared at him in disbelief. "But Captain," one of them protested. "We have orders to capture Leora." "Those orders are rescinded," Captain Rylus replied. "We're done here." He turned to Leora, his expression filled with regret. "I'm sorry for everything," he said. "I hope you can forgive me." And then, he turned and walked away, leading his soldiers out of the complex. As the Zarkan soldiers disappeared into the darkness, the resistance fighters erupted into cheers. They had won. They had survived. Kieran watched in amazement as Captain Rylus walked away. He had never expected the bounty hunter to betray the Zarkan Dominion. He looked at Leora, his heart filled with gratitude and admiration. She was a true leader, capable of inspiring even her enemies to change their ways. "What happens now?" Kieran asked. Leora smiled, her silver eyes shining with determination. "Now," she said, "we prepare for war."